Single dad Janitor played a broken violin in the lobby at 2 a.m. Then a music critic stopped in tears. If you're going to haunt a place, at least bring something worth listening to. The voice was whispered, half laughing, almost lost in the hush of marble and shadow. But Elias Ward didn't hear it. He wasn't playing for anyone. It was 2:03 a.m. The great hall of the Hawthorne Conservatory was empty save for the man kneeling beside a rusted janitor's cart. He wore a faded uniform, sleeves rolled just above weathered forearms. A ring of keys jingled softly at his belt as he moved with practiced efficiency until his hand stopped hovering over the mop handle. Instead, Elias reached into the cart and pulled out a worn leather case. He hesitated. The fluorescent lights above flickered once, casting long, pale reflections across the glossy floor. Outside the glass walls, the city was silent, cold. He opened the case. The violin inside was battered, its varnish worn down to raw wood in some places. One of the fine tuners was missing. The strings weren't new, but Elias held it with the reverence of a father cradling something that had once lived. He tucked the chin rest under his jaw and let the bow hover. Then he played. The sound wasn't perfect, but it was real. Raw, aching, fragile. The first notes wavered, then gained clarity as his fingers remembered the path. A melody, soft and haunting, rose into the cavernous space. It was not a famous piece. Not Bach, not Vivaldi. It was something simpler, something remembered. Lullaby. Halfway through the second refrain, his shoulders trembled. But he didn't stop. Behind the second-floor balcony rail, someone stood motionless. She had entered minutes earlier, shoes clicking softly across marble before she froze, trapped by the sound. Now she gripped the edge of the railing as if letting go might shatter the spell. Isabel Vance hadn't meant to be here. She'd left her meeting with the conservatory board hours ago, restless, frustrated. She didn't believe in ghosts. But this music, it felt like one. The janitor below never looked up. His eyes were closed. The melody floated upward, each note shaped by sorrow, by memory. Isabel's throat constricted before she realized why. She was crying. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind with gasps or sobs. Just the slow, disbelieving tears that fall when something cracks in you unexpectedly because a stranger dared to play the truth out loud. Elias reached the final note. It hung in the air like breath on a cold window pane. Then silence. He lowered the bow, tucked the violin back into the case, and limped away. Isabel stepped back, breath-shallow, pulse unsteady. She didn't dare follow. Not yet. The next morning, Elias stood beside the vending machines in the staff hallway, watching the coffee sputter into a paper cup. He looked like he hadn't slept. He rarely did. Morning Ward called a voice from down the hall. It was Felix, the building supervisor. Loud, friendly, clueless. Another quiet night of ghost mops and dust bunnies. Elias offered a tight smile. Best company I've had in years. Felix chuckled. You're lucky. I got a dozen violin prodigies upstairs keeping me up past midnight. I swear, one of them's practicing Paganini with a meat cleaver. Elias took his coffee and walked away. Meanwhile, across the city, Isabel Vance sat in a corner booth at a quiet cafe staring at a blinking cursor on her laptop. Her editor wanted a column, a safe one. Profiles of Promise Meet Hawthorne's rising stars. She had a list of student bios in her inbox, notes from the dean, a program brochure. But all she could think about was him, the man with the mop and the broken violin. She didn't know his name, didn't know the piece he played, but the sound was still lodged in her chest like a splinter she didn't want removed. Her fingers moved, not toward the notes, but toward a blank page. The janitor who played My Soul Awake. That was her headline. The column poured out of her in one sitting. It wasn't a review, it wasn't criticism, it was a confession. He didn't play like a student. He didn't play like someone seeking approval. He played like a man remembering a voice he never wanted to forget. She didn't submit it under her name. Not yet. Just a pseudonym. Just a whisper. Back at the conservatory, Elias was scrubbing gum from the underside of a stairwell when Vivian Moray appeared beside him. The founder of the conservatory was 72 and dressed like a retired ballerina turned chess master. Long scarf, sharp gaze, deliberate silence. "You missed a spot," she said, pointing to nothing in particular. Elias looked up, startled. "Good morning, Miss Moray." She crouched beside him without asking. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. He blinked. Miss what? Being heard? Elias didn't answer. His eyes flicked down to the brush in his hand. She stood again with a sigh. "You know, some people play to be remembered. Others play because they can't forget." Then she walked away. Elias sat still long after she left the scrub brush slipping from his hand. That night, something changed. When he entered the lobby at 2:03 a.m., the violin case was already sitting on the bench. Not in the cart, not in the closet, on the bench, waiting. He looked around. Empty. Still. He picked it up, and once again he played. This time a different melody. Slower, softer, tentative. Halfway through his fingers faltered, and from the darkness above a voice echoed softly only 2 words. "Don't stop." His breath caught. He looked up. No one. The lobby was empty. Only shadows and silence. He wasn't alone, and for the first time in years, he didn't want to be. The rain came late, soft, uncertain, as if the sky couldn't decide whether it wanted to mourn or just wash the day clean. Isabel Vance sat behind the fogged windshield of her car outside the conservatory, her hands gripping the steering wheel long after the engine had cooled. She hadn't planned to come back. Not tonight, not so soon. But the memory of that melody, the one the janitor played like it had been carved from his ribs, had followed her home like perfume clinging to skin. She hadn't been able to write about the students, or the upcoming gala, or the board's relentless insistence on reinvigorating the brand. She'd stared at her laptop for hours, deleted every sentence that felt safe. So she came back. Not for a story, for a sound. Inside the building, Elias moved quietly like always. His cart rattled slightly as he pushed it past the faculty lounge, past the auditorium doors to the glass atrium that overlooked the city skyline. Most nights he avoided the more public wings, but tonight felt different. There was a tension inside him he couldn't name, an ache that vibrated against the bones beneath his skin. He thought about the violin on the bench last night, about the whisper from the shadows. Don't stop. He hadn't told anyone, hadn't dared ask. He just played again. And when he did, he'd felt something shift like a lock he didn't know existed had quietly unlatched. Isabel stepped through the front entrance without a badge, her heels clicking softly against the marble. She didn't try to hide this time. If he was playing, she wanted to see him. But the lobby was empty. No man. No violin. Just the echo of her own breath. She wandered toward the atrium, the hem of her trench coat brushing against the polished floor. Then she heard it. Not music. A voice. Elias was talking to himself. Or so it would have seemed. He stood near the massive glass window holding the violin in one hand, bow dangling in the other. He wasn't playing. He was staring out at the rain. "I used to think music could keep her here," he murmured. "Like if I played the right song, maybe I could bring her back for just one more night." Isabel froze. She'd sit right there on the rug. Pretend. Conduct me with a plastic straw. Called herself Maestro Clara. A soft laugh escaped him, broken at the edges. "I couldn't play at her funeral. Couldn't even touch the damn thing." He lowered his head. "But some nights when it's too quiet to breathe, I still hear her." Isabel's voice surprised even herself. Maybe she's still listening. Elias spun around. Their eyes met. And for the first time they really saw each other. Not janitor, not critic, just 2 people haunted by sound. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop," she said, stepping closer. "I was just drawn." Elias's grip on the violin tightened. You again. You remember me? He nodded once. Balcony. Monday night. Sharp memory. Music doesn't usually make people cry unless it touches something they thought was buried. She blinked. Is that what it did to you? He looked down. I think I've been buried for years. A long silence stretched between them. Then she asked softly, what happened to her? His jaw flexed. Clara. My daughter. He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. The name landed like glass in a quiet room. I'm sorry, she said and meant it. Elias gave a nod of thanks. You're right. That caught her off guard. What? He pointed subtly to her leather bag. The notepad. The journalist badge. And the way you watch people like you're collecting pieces for later. Occupational hazard. Your column, he said. The anonymous one. That was you. She hesitated. You read it. I don't usually read much anymore. But someone printed it and left it in my locker. A beat. Clara's locker, he added, barely audible. Something pulled tight in her chest. I didn't write it for exposure, she said quickly. I didn't even put my name on it. That's how I knew it was real. They sat across from each other in the empty atrium lounge, the city lights glowing behind them like an orchestra waiting to begin. Elias rested the violin on his lap. Isabel studied the scratches on its body. You ever fix it? She asked. I've tried, he said. But some things are meant to stay cracked. I used to play, she admitted. Piano. Carnegie Prep. Trophies, scholarships, the whole thing. He arched an eyebrow. Used to. She didn't answer right away. My sister, she finally said. She was better than me. Violinist, brilliant, brave. She swallowed hard. She died on stage, a seizure, mid-performance. I watched it happen from the wings. The air went still. After that, I couldn't touch the keys, she continued. Felt like the music betrayed us. Elias looked at her, and for the first time there was no mask on his face. Just honesty. You and I, he said slowly, we've both been holding funerals every time we open our mouths. She let out a quiet breath. So, why do you still play? He considered the question. Then answered with a voice barely above a whisper. Because if I don't, she disappears. They sat in silence for several minutes. Not awkward, not forced, just real. Finally, Isabel stood. I'd like to hear you play again, she said. Elias looked up. Why? Because I need to remember what it feels like when something is true. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. She took that as enough. As she walked away, Elias picked up the violin again. And from behind her, the music returned. Not perfect, but honest. And for the first time in a long time, Isabel didn't feel like she was running from ghosts. She was walking toward something that sounded a lot like healing. Elias didn't come in through the front doors that night. He entered through the side loading dock where the snowdrift was shallow and the light was broken. His boots crunched on salt pellets as he moved past the dumpsters and into the hallway like a shadow folding into itself. Tonight felt heavier. He hadn't played in 2 days. Not since that night with Isabel. Not since he saw her eyes soften in the dim glow of the atrium as if his sorrow had mirrored her own. He didn't know what to do with that kind of reflection. The locker room was empty, just how he liked it. A row of dented gray lockers, a flickering overhead bulb, and the quiet drip of a sink that hadn't stopped leaking since October. He opened locker number 17. Inside, on the back wall, taped with yellowing corners, was a child's drawing. Crayon on faded construction paper. A stick figure man holding a violin beside a little girl with a wild swirl of yellow hair, both standing under a crooked rainbow. Above them, in careful block letters, me and Daddy. We sing even when it rains. Clara Elias stared at it the way a man might stare into the ocean, knowing if he stepped any closer it would pull him under. He sat down on the bench, elbows on knees, hands clasped so tightly they shook. Sometimes grief didn't shout. Sometimes it just sat beside you in a room and waited for you to speak first. Vivienne Murray entered without knocking. She never did. "Still here, Mr. Ward," she said softly, more observation than greeting. Elias didn't look up. "Depends how you define here." Vivienne stepped closer. "I heard you played again." He gave a quiet nod. "She heard you too." He turned. Who, Vivienne didn't answer. Instead, she leaned against the locker beside his. "I saw you once," she said before all this. "You were playing at a hospital fundraiser. Clara was about 5. She kept tugging your sleeve between phrases, trying to get your attention." Elias allowed a faint smile. "She wanted me to play Twinkle, Twinkle in the middle of Bach." "She didn't care about Bach," Vivienne said. "She cared about you." Elias's expression dimmed again. "You never asked why I hired you," she said after a pause. "A man with a Juilliard background cleaning baseboards, I could have hired 10 others. I didn't want favors." "You didn't get one," she said. "You got a second chance you weren't ready for. But I think you're getting close." He looked up. "Close to what?" "To forgiving yourself." Isabel stood in the music library flipping through old concert programs she wasn't really reading. Her phone buzzed beside her. A text from her editor. "Where are you with the conservatory profiles? You're 2 days past deadline. Need the next piece today." She silenced it. Then her eyes caught a photo on one of the pages. It was a charity concert poster. Hawthorne Winter Gala, featuring Elias Ward Violin. The date, 6 years ago. The same name. Same face, except smiling, unburdened. His arms around a little girl whose blonde curls looked like rays of sunlight. Clara. Isabel's fingers hovered over the image. Then she whispered to herself, "You weren't always the ghost." Later that night, Elias walked into the atrium. The lights were low. He hadn't brought the violin. But on the bench, exactly where it had been left before, sat a small envelope. No name. He picked it up. Inside was a page torn from a notepad folded neatly. He unfolded it slowly. "Play it again. The one that breaks hearts. I think mine's ready now." He stared at it for a long time, heart thudding with something that wasn't quite fear and not yet hope. Then, as if led by an unseen current, he turned and walked back to the locker room. He opened locker 17, reached past Clara's drawing, pulled out the case. He carried it like a prayer back to the atrium, and this time when he played, he didn't close his eyes. Isabel heard it from the hallway. She didn't enter. Not yet. She leaned against the wall, hand resting over her chest as if to keep her heart from breaking in half. The melody was different this time. Fuller, stronger, still aching but with a quiet courage beneath every note. He's not playing just for her anymore, she realized. He's playing to be heard. After the last note faded, Elias lowered the bow slowly. And then he saw her, standing in the corridor beyond the glass doors, arms folded, hair damp from the snow. "You came back," he said, his voice quiet. "I never left," she replied. "I just didn't know where to sit." He opened the door and let her in. They sat side by side on the atrium bench. Neither spoke for a long time. Then Isabel asked, "Did Clara ever hear you play that song?" "No," Elias said. "I wrote it the night after she died. I couldn't play it until now." She nodded. "Then maybe she's hearing it now." Elias looked at her eyes, red but clear. "I hope so," he said, "because for the first time I'm not playing to remember her." He paused. "I'm playing so she'll know I'm still becoming the man she believed I was." Isabel's breath caught. And in that moment, without a single tear falling, the two of them sat in a grief so shared it didn't feel like sorrow anymore. It felt like something sacred. The thing about grief is if you don't speak it, it starts speaking for you. In Elias Ward's case, it spoke through a broom. Each morning at Hawthorne Conservatory, as students in pressed uniforms carried violins and cello cases past him without eye contact, Elias pushed the broom like a priest swinging incense slowly, deliberately, with a kind of reverence no one understood. No one but her. Isabel Vance stood just beyond the glass doors of the main studio, arms crossed, watching Elias sweep the marbled hallway with the same quiet focus he brought to a violin bow. She hadn't meant to come back 3 days in a row, but here she was again, drawn to a man who didn't speak unless it mattered and played music like it was a language the world had forgotten. "You know," she said, startling him slightly, "you sweep floors the same way you play, like it might save somebody." Elias didn't stop moving. "Sometimes it does." She tilted her head. "Save who?" He looked up, met her eyes. "Me." The honesty landed like a stone in her chest. "You ever feel like the world handed you sheet music for a life you didn't sign up to perform?" she asked. Elias leaned on the broom handle. "Every day since she died." Isabel nodded. "For me, it was the day my sister collapsed on stage." She stepped closer. "Eleanor was everything I wasn't, daring, loud, brilliant." And then silence. Elias didn't say anything. "You know what the worst part was?" Isabel continued. "I didn't cry. Not at the funeral. Not at the hospital. I just shut off. Like a piano with every key glued down." "You shut down," Elias said softly, "because if you let one tear out, the whole damn symphony might start." She blinked, caught off guard. "Exactly." Elias nodded toward the hallway. "Walk with me." They walked slowly past practice rooms echoing with arpeggios and timid scales. Students passed them without notice, 2 ghosts in a temple of performance. "You still play?" Elias asked. Isabel shook her head. "Haven't touched a piano in 10 years. "Why?" She hesitated. "Because every time I sat down, I heard her." He looked over. And now she sighed. "Now I think maybe I want to hear her again. Just not alone." They reached the end of the hallway where the old chapel had been converted into a storage space. Elias stopped in front of a double door and pulled out a key. "Come on," he said. "I want to show you something." Inside was a mess. Dusty chairs, broken music stands, crates labeled "Do Not Use." But tucked in the back corner was something unexpected, a baby grand piano. Its legs scratched, its keys slightly yellowed. "You kept this here?" she asked. "It was Clara's favorite," he said. "Said it had a warmer sound, like it remembered people." Isabel moved toward it as if approaching an old friend she thought had died. She ran her fingers across the lid. Elias watched her, not rushing. Finally she sat. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Trembled. She pressed one. Just one. It echoed through the room like a memory returning home. Elias knelt beside a nearby crate and opened the battered violin case. The scent of rosin and old wood filled the air. He stood, and without a word they began to play. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. But it was honest. The melody they built was slow, cautious. Her left hand testing simple chords. His bow finding breath between hesitation. And then something shifted. Their griefs began to speak to each other. Her sadness shaped the structure. His loss gave it color. By the time the last note faded, they weren't crying, but neither could quite breathe. Isabel turned to him. That wasn't a duet. That was confession. Elias smiled barely. "Then I guess you're the first person I've confessed to in years." She stood slowly. "You're not just a janitor, Elias." "I never was," he said. "But it was easier to disappear if I pretended I was." Later that day, Isabel sat in her hotel room staring at her laptop again. The cursor blinked like it had something to say. This time, she let it speak. Ghosts don't always wear white sheets or rattle chains. Some of them push mops. Some of them play music so quietly you only hear it if your own soul has gone quiet too. She stopped, reread the line. Then she added, "His name is Elias Ward, and if music has saints, he might be one of them." She didn't send it. Not yet. Some truths deserve to be held a little longer before being shared with the world. That evening, Elias returned to the storage room alone. He didn't play. He sat beside the piano, hands folded. and then he whispered as if to someone invisible. Clara. Maybe I was never silent. I just forgot what my voice sounded like. The room didn't answer, but for the first time in a very long while, Elias didn't feel like he was talking to a ghost. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he was being heard. If I fall off this roof, tell them it was your idea. Isabel's voice broke the stillness like a laugh in a church, half joking, half nervous, entirely alive. Elias didn't look back. He stood at the edge of the rooftop of the conservatory, hands in the pockets of his faded jacket, gazing out over the city as snow began to whisper down in delicate spirals. He'd left the rooftop door unlocked that night, hoping she might follow. "You'll be fine," he said quietly. "Fear of heights only counts if you plan on falling." "Very comforting," she muttered, stepping fully onto the gravel, pulling her coat tighter. "What are we doing up here?" He didn't answer right away. The skyline stretched before them in sharp silhouettes and golden windows. The distant hum of traffic below sounded like an orchestra tuning before the first note. Elias finally turned to her eyes, thoughtful. "Up here. You can hear your own silence." Isabel raised an eyebrow. "I don't usually enjoy being alone with my silence." Elias nodded. "Most people don't. It says things we work hard to drown out." She folded her arms. "And what does yours say?" He turned back to the city. "That I'm not finished yet." They stood in quiet for a moment that held more than words could. Then Elias took the worn violin case from beside the wall, opened it, tuned it by ear. No stage lights, no warm-up, just cold fingers and a slow breath. He began to play. Not for anyone, not even for Clara. This time he played for himself. The melody wasn't loud or showy. It moved with restraint, like a memory reintroduced slowly so it wouldn't break him again. It was written in a minor key, but it wasn't mournful. It searched. Every note felt like a question he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Isabel watched him, not blinking. The way his face changed mid-phrase. The way he tilted the violin ever so slightly at the crescendo, as if coaxing it not just to sound, but to speak. "I never understood how someone could play sorrow into a room," she whispered. "But you don't just play it. You translate it." Elias didn't stop playing, so she walked closer. And without asking, she sat beside him on the ledge. Their shoulders didn't touch, but the nearness felt like a dialogue. When the last note died, neither moved. "You know," Isabel said softly, "this would be a beautiful story." Elias smirked. "What, depressed janitor plays violin on rooftop with emotionally unavailable journalist, more like two ghosts who stopped pretending to be alive and started trying." Elias exhaled slow. "Trying's the hard part. The only part," she replied. He turned to her. "Why do you really keep coming back?" She met his eyes. "Because you're the first sound I've heard in 10 years that didn't feel like noise. The words weren't romantic. They were real." Elias looked down at the violin, then at her, and before he could stop himself, he asked, "Do you miss her?" Isabel didn't ask who he meant. "Yes," she said, "every day. And not just the big things. I miss how she used to correct my posture when I played piano. I miss the way she rolled her eyes when I got sentimental." She paused. "I miss being needed." Elias's gaze drifted. "That's what grief doesn't tell you. That it's not just loss, it's loneliness, with a name." A gust of wind kicked snow across the roof. Isabel shivered. Elias noticed. He stood and shrugged off his coat, placing it around her shoulders. "I'm not fragile," she said. "I know," he replied, "but you're allowed to be cold." She smiled. "You're infuriatingly gentle, you know that." He chuckled. "Takes practice." There was something in the air now, an ache, yes, but one that vibrated with potential. As if the night were holding its breath for something. "You ever think," she said suddenly, "about playing again?" On stage, Elias shook his head. "Not in a place where people clap." Why not? Because I'm not ready for applause. I'm just now learning how to stop hiding. She studied him. You don't hide when you play. That's the only time I don't. They sat in silence again. But this one felt earned. Finally, Elias stood and looked toward the stairwell. Come on, he said, before you catch pneumonia and I end up getting sued. Isabel stood too. What if I told you? I'd like to hear that piece again. Maybe somewhere warm next time. Elias nodded. Maybe. As they walked down the narrow staircase, their footsteps echoed like a soft coda to a rooftop symphony. Before she disappeared down her hallway, she turned back. Elias. He looked up. Do you ever wonder? She asked if music can be the beginning after the end. He considered it. I think music is the beginning, he said. The silence just teaches us how to listen. Back in the empty atrium under the same dim lights where it had all started, Elias stood alone. He looked at the violin, then at the empty bench. He didn't sit. He just whispered, "Thank you, Clara," for making sure I wasn't the only one listening. Then, slowly, quietly, he began to play again. This time, not for her. Not for himself, but for whoever still believed that broken things could still carry beautiful sound. The snow had turned to sleet by morning, harsh, wet, undecided. It tapped against the windows of the conservatory like fingers too impatient to knock. Inside the administrative archives, Isabel Vance stood in a room most people forgot existed. Shelves of dusty programs, grant applications, donor logs, and concert records lined the walls like a library abandoned by time. The air smelled of old paper and furniture polish. She wasn't supposed to be here, but something had been pulling at her since that night on the roof. The music, the silence after, and the look on Elias's face when he said, "I think I'm not finished yet." She was looking for answers. Instead, she found a name. It started with a box labeled Winter Gala 2017. She flipped through photo inserts and seating charts until she spotted a handwritten donor card tucked between pages. Her fingers froze. Scholarship Inquiry. Ward Clara. Age 5. Daughter of Elias Ward. Talent Early Development Violin. Recommendation Julian Vance. Her own last name. Her own father's signature. Isabel stared at the page like it might disappear if she blinked. It didn't. She stormed out of the archives with the paper clutched in her coat pocket and fury burning like static under her skin. The next call wasn't to her editor. It was to her father. Julian Vance answered on the third ring, his voice polished and clipped as ever. "Isabel, I was just thinking about you. Have you finished your profile series? The conservatory board said they haven't seen anything published yet." "Dad," she cut in, "why is your name on a scholarship letter for Elias Ward's daughter?" There was silence on the other end. "Then, that's not something I thought you'd ever see." "But it's true," Julian sighed. "Yes, years ago, before the accident. What happened? I offered Elias Ward a full scholarship for his daughter private tutoring future placement, even a potential debut under the foundation's name. And he declined." Isabel blinked. "Why? He said he didn't want his daughter growing up as someone else's story." "That sounds like him," she muttered. Julian continued. "The problem was I'd already made arrangements. I'd promised donors her debut. When he backed out, everything unraveled. And then the fire happened." Julian's tone cooled. "Unrelated? Was it?" Isabel asked, her voice low. Julian said nothing. "You used a little girl as a pitch deck," she said. "And when her father wouldn't sell her off, you made sure he'd never get another invitation." "She died, Isabel," he said sharply. "That wasn't on me. But what came after was, he disappeared, took a mop, gave up music." Julian exhaled. "That man chose silence. That wasn't my doing." Isabel's voice broke. "Maybe. But you made sure the world wouldn't listen if he ever spoke again." Back at the conservatory, Elias stood in the courtyard brushing slush from the walkway. Vivienne Moret approached her cane, tapping gently on the stone path. "I saw her," she said. "Who, Isabel?" "In the archives." Elias straightened, looking for what Vivian's gaze softened. A thread she didn't know existed. "Sometimes healing leads us into the attic." "I'm not sure I want anything she might find," Elias said. Vivian smiled gently. "She's not digging for your pain, Elias. She's digging for the part of you forgot how to believe in." He paused. "What if it's gone?" "It's not," she said. "It's just buried under the dust of survival." That night, Isabel stood outside the janitor's locker room, a folder in her hands. She didn't knock, just waited. Elias emerged a few minutes later, wiping his hands on a cloth. Their eyes met. She handed him the folder. "You should see this." He opened it, read the letter, froze. The silence between them stretched like glass. "Why now?" he asked. "Because if you're going to keep playing, you deserve to know what you were fighting against." He looked up. "I wasn't fighting. You were running," she said. "And maybe now, you don't have to." Elias closed the folder. "Do you believe in fate?" "No," Isabel replied. "But I believe in choice. And this time you get to choose how your story ends." He studied her face, and for the first time let the truth rise up inside him without pushing it down. "She died believing music was magic," he said, "and I let it become a curse." "No," Isabel said softly. "You let it go silent. That's not the same as giving up. That's grief." He swallowed hard, then finally whispered, "I want to play again. Not just at night, not just when no one's watching." She stepped closer. "Then I'll help you make them listen." Later that evening, Elias stood in the same hallway where students often passed him by. Only this time he carried the violin case in plain sight. He didn't flinch when they looked, didn't shrink. He moved like a man reclaiming something that had once been stolen, not just his name but the music inside it. They say grief comes in waves, but Elias Ward had lived long enough to know that sometimes it crashes like a flood. It started innocently enough. The conservatory was hosting a donor luncheon in the upper gallery, a tradition Elias typically avoided by scheduling his duties far from the catered smiles and polished pleasantries. But this time, Felix, the ever-cheerful supervisor, had twisted his arm. "We're short on hands," he said. "Just set up some extra chairs near the piano." No big deal. Elias had nodded, too tired to argue. He didn't expect him to be there. Julian Vance stood near the buffet table, a whiskey in hand and a diamond watch glinting beneath his tailored cuff. His laugh, deep, calculated hollow, was unmistakable. Elias froze mid-step. His throat dried, his knees nearly buckled, but he kept walking, set the last chair in place, tried to vanish, but Julian saw him, and smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind that remembers how it felt to win. "Ward," he said loudly as if recalling an old joke, still pushing chairs instead of sonatas. The room quieted a notch. Just enough. Elias straightened, still cashing checks off other people's talent. Julian's smile tightened. "You always were a difficult man," Julian said, stepping closer. "But I'll give you credit, you know how to hold a grudge." "This isn't a grudge," Elias replied, voice low. "It's a memory. A poor one, clearly," Julian sneered. "I offered your daughter a future. You turned it into an epitaph." The words landed like a slap. Elias saw white. His hand clenched into a fist before he knew what it meant to do. For a second, just a second, every ounce of pain he'd buried screamed to rise. But then, a voice behind him. Elias, Isabel, standing just outside the archway. Eyes wide, breath held. He lowered his hand. Julian looked between them, laughed. "Well, well, I see the journalist inherited your taste for damaged things." Isabel stepped forward and slapped him. The sound echoed through the marble like a cymbal crash. "You lost the right to call yourself my father the moment you turned a grieving man into your scapegoat," she said, shaking. "Now get out of his way." Julian stared at her. Then at Elias. Then, like every coward cloaked in power, he turned and walked out without a word. Elias left the event minutes later, not waiting for applause or apologies. He found himself in the old music room, the one with Clara's favorite piano. His hands trembled as he reached for the violin. But when he lifted the bow, his fingers wouldn't move. He stared at the strings, at the scuffs on the wood, at the place where Clara once put stickers of stars and hearts to make Daddy's violin pretty again, and he cracked. He dropped the instrument, sank to the floor, and wept. The kind of weeping that steals the breath, that splits the ribs, that makes you beg the ceiling for answers you no longer expect. "I was just trying to protect her," he whispered to the floor. "I didn't want her to be used. I didn't want her to become them." But the silence only answered with ache. He stayed curled there for a long time, the violin untouched, the song unplayed. That evening, Isabel found him sitting on the conservatory steps, staring out at the empty courtyard, snow falling again just enough to coat the stone like memory. She sat beside him, didn't speak. After a moment, he said, "He blamed me. He's wrong. But what if he's not?" Elias's voice was hoarse. "What if she could have lived a bigger life if I'd said yes?" Isabel looked at him, not with pity, with knowing. "My sister got everything she ever wanted," she said. Competitions, spotlights, critics who used words like prodigy and once in a generation. And in the end, none of it saved her. Elias closed his eyes. "I don't know how to carry it anymore," he whispered. "You don't carry it," she said. "You play it. That's the only way it gets out." He looked at her, and for the first time in days, something in his expression softened. Not healed, but cracked just enough for the light to start seeping in again. The next morning, Elias didn't open his locker. He didn't carry the violin. He went to work, cleaned quietly, nodded to Felix, repaired a cracked tile outside the recital room, and when the day ended, he walked home alone. But on his kitchen table beside an unopened letter from the utilities company sat a note. His handwriting. Years old. It read, "If you ever stop playing, she disappears." He stared at the paper, then at the violin case beside it, and, slowly, reached for the latch. Elias didn't believe in signs. Not anymore. But the moment his fingers touched the edge of that old letter, creased, yellowed, hidden behind a lining in the locker he'd opened every day for years, something in the air shifted. The envelope was addressed in Clara's handwriting, tiny, looping script that still carried the innocence of childhood but had begun to reach for maturity. She had tucked it away where she knew he'd find it. One day, his knees weakened. He sat on the bench, heart hammering the world around him, muffled like he was underwater. He opened it with trembling fingers. "Dear Dad, I know you'll find this after I'm gone." Not gone. I mean, like one of those days you're tired or sad and open your locker and think of me. I just wanted to say something. You think I didn't notice, but I did. Every sacrifice, every skipped dinner, every tear you never let fall. I know you gave up the stage for me. You gave up everything. But you have to stop giving up now. Because if you stop playing, then I disappear. The rest was smudged with what he could only assume were her tears, or maybe his own. It didn't matter, because at that moment Elias Ward knew something with devastating clarity. He hadn't just buried Clara's music. He had buried himself, and it was time to come back. That evening, the conservatory hall was empty. Echoes of daylight still clung to the high windows, casting amber shadows across the polished floor. Elias wheeled in the old upright piano from the back closet. Not the Steinway, not the stage-worthy grand, just the one with the worn ivory keys Clara used to press with sticky fingers after lunch. He placed his violin case on the bench, opened it slowly. This time he didn't hesitate. The bow met the strings. and the first note trembled through the air like a soul finding its voice after years of silence. He didn't play one of Clara's old recital pieces. He didn't reach for anything classical or recognizable. He just played, from pain, from memory, from that fragile space between grief and grace. Each note was a letter unsent, each phrase a conversation never finished, each crescendo a plea. Please don't forget her. And somehow in the ache of melody he felt Clara again, not as a ghost, as breath. Outside the hall someone was listening. Isabel hadn't meant to come. She'd told herself she needed to drop off a file to Felix. That was the excuse, but the truth was simpler. She missed Elias. Not in the obvious way, not with flowers and flutters. She missed the way he looked at a music stand like it held the answer to the universe. She missed the way he listened more than he spoke, and she missed the ache in his silence because it matched her own. So when she heard the music drifting from the conservatory doors, she froze. The sound was raw, beautiful, imperfect, human. She pressed her palm to the glass and cried. The next day, Elias left a folded note on Felix's desk. I'd like to submit a composition for the student spring concert. Felix read it 3 times, blinked, looked toward the hallway where Elias had just quietly disappeared. Then he smiled and whispered, "About damn time." Weeks passed in quiet diligence. Elias wrote, rewrote, scratched entire staves only to rebuild them with the stubborn patience of a man stitching a wound from the inside out. Isabel watched from a respectful distance. Sometimes she'd bring him coffee and ask nothing. Other times she'd sit beside him at the rehearsal room piano, letting her fingers dance beside his in silence. One evening, she broke it. "You know, I spent so long chasing perfection in others' music, I forgot how flawed beauty really is." Elias glanced sideways. Maybe perfection was never the goal. Then what is? He hesitated, then said quietly, "To be heard. Really heard." She nodded. "I hear you." Those 3 words, spoken without expectation or condition, landed deeper than she knew. On the night of the spring concert, Elias didn't wear a tux. He wore his janitor uniform. Pressed clean sleeves rolled. He stood backstage holding the violin like it was alive in his hands again. Isabel walked over holding a small velvet box. "Clara would have wanted you to have this." Inside was a pin, a tiny silver clef polished to a soft gleam. Elias blinked fast. "She got it for you after your first cleaning shift here." She said, "If they won't see the music in you, then she would." He pinned it to his collar without a word. Then he stepped onto the stage. The room quieted. There was no fanfare, no announcement, just a man, a violin, and the hush of expectation. And then he played. The piece was called The Notes We Leave Behind. It wasn't complicated, but it was honest. It held sorrow, but didn't drown in it. It held memory, but reached for tomorrow. And somewhere between the bridges and the fall of each measure, there was forgiveness. He finished, and for a moment no one moved. Then the first person stood, then another, until the room was on its feet not for the skill, but for the courage. Backstage, Elias sat alone, wiping the bridge of the violin. Isabel appeared beside him. He looked up. She would have laughed. At all the wrong notes. She would have danced anyway, Isabel said, sitting beside him. They didn't speak for a while. Then Elias turned to her. "You ever think music doesn't heal, I think?" She began, then paused. "I think healing isn't about erasing the pain. It's about turning it into something that can be shared." He looked at her, at the eyes that had seen too much and still chose softness, and he said, "Stay." She didn't ask for how long. She just took his hand. The conservatory's great hall hadn't buzzed with this much anticipation in years. Velvet seats filled row by row. Chandeliers hummed with golden light, casting their soft glow over the audience, patrons, critics, students, skeptics. On stage, a grand Steinway waited silently, its lid, raised like a question. A single spotlight hung above, still dimmed, and somewhere backstage a man who used to mop this very floor was steadying hands that hadn't touched a violin in weeks. Vivian stood near the wings, heart thumping beneath her paisley scarf. "Please don't leave me hanging, Elias," she whispered to no one. A hush fell. The house lights dimmed. The MC took the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, before our showcase concludes, the faculty would like to present something unexpected." A ripple of murmurs. From the far right of the stage, under no fanfare, Elias Ward stepped into the light. He looked smaller than expected. Not frail, just real. No tuxedo, no polished shoes. Just a simple black shirt sleeves rolled up and a repaired violin in hand. The spotlight found him. So did the silence. Somewhere in the second row, a young girl whispered, "Isn't that the janitor?" Another answered, "Shh, that's him, the one from the article." Elias didn't speak. He just adjusted the violin beneath his chin, and for one breathless moment everything held still. Then came the first note. Soft, raw, not perfect, but alive. And then another sound. A second voice, not from the violin. From the far side of the stage, Isabel Vance stepped out in a long navy dress. Her hands hovered above the Steinway, uncertain. Gasps echoed. Some recognized her immediately. Others just felt at the tension of someone reclaiming something lost. She didn't glance at Elias, but she didn't need to. He nodded once as if to say, "Now." Together they began. A simple, aching duet. Not flashy, not fast, just honest. Notes layered like memory, one voice reaching the other, grounding. Her piano wrapped around his melody like arms around a child. Somewhere in the back, Vivian clutched the edge of the curtain tiers already breaking free. The hall disappeared. The world narrowed to two people on a stage, two souls who had lost everything, and were finding each other in music. Midway through the piece, Elias closed his eyes and saw Clara. Not in smoke, not in ashes, but in light. She was sitting cross-legged on the wooden floor of their old apartment, cradling her toy violin, swaying to his playing. Her lips moved with words only he could hear. "Play it for them, Dad. Not because you have to, because you can." He didn't miss a note. Isabel, meanwhile, kept her gaze locked on the keys, but her mind was on her sister. Eleanor's last performance had ended in chaos. Isabel hadn't touched a piano since. But now, she felt Eleanor in the pauses, in the rests, in every gentle decrescendo, and for the first time in years the grief didn't crush her, it lifted. When the final note hung in the air, neither of them moved. Silence full and sacred held the room, and then applause, thunderous, standing, a wave of sound that crashed down and rose again like the sea. Some cried, some just stood hands trembling. A woman in the front row whispered to her husband, "I don't know what I just heard, but I felt it." Backstage, Julian Vance stood frozen behind the curtain. He had come to see the show expecting to gloat at Elias's absence. Instead, he witnessed something no amount of money could orchestrate. His daughter, radiant, playing. For love, not legacy. And the man he once looked down on, commanding a crowd without a word. Julian stepped back into the shadows. On stage, Elias gave the faintest bow. His eyes met Isabel's. No smile, just acknowledgement. Something had shifted. They left the stage together. Backstage, breathless and flushed, Isabel leaned against the wall. "You didn't miss a beat." Elias shook his head. "I didn't play it for them." She looked up. "Then who?" He met her gaze, voice quiet but clear. "For Clara, and for the girl who stopped playing because she thought silence was safer." Her eyes shimmered, and she whispered, "It was, until now." Vivian appeared, wiping her cheeks with a handkerchief she pretended not to need. If I die tonight, bury me right here in the orchestra pit. I've lived enough." Isabel laughed, breathless. Elias's lips curved, the closest thing to a smile anyone had seen from him since before. Vivian squeezed their hands. "You both brought the roof down. But more than that, you brought the music home." The three of them stood there for a beat. Then Isabel turned to Elias. "There's a park. Clara loved it, didn't she?" His eyes widened. "How'd you?" "I read everything she left behind. Vivienne gave me copies. I'd like to go there, with you, just to sit. No violins, no pianos, just silence. The good kind." He nodded. "I'd like that." The applause had faded. The stage was dark. But something had shifted permanently in both their lives, not with noise, but with stillness. Late that night, the city lay quiet beneath a blanket of misty streetlight. Elias and Isabel sat side by side on a bench in Greystone Park, Clara's favorite. A gentle wind whispered through the trees, rustling the swing set chains in the distance. No cameras, no audience. Just them and the kind of silence that feels earned. "I used to bring her here after her lessons," Elias said, his voice low, rough from emotion. "She'd always climb that crooked slide and pretend it was a pirate ship. She'd yell, 'Full sail, Dad,' like she was conquering the world." Isabel smiled softly. "And you, I'd sit right here, same bench. Sometimes I'd close my eyes and listen to her laugh. That laugh, it healed more than music ever could." A pause. "You never told me how it happened," Isabel said gently. Elias stared ahead. It was a fire, old wiring in the building. "I was at work. She was home alone for just an hour. 1 hour." His jaw clenched. "She was always drawing, always making up stories. The firefighters said she'd crawled under the piano, as if maybe she thought it would protect her." Isabel didn't speak. She just reached over and took his hand. For once, he didn't pull away. "She'd be proud of you," she whispered. "No," Elias said. "She'd be proud of us. That duet, it wasn't just music, it was permission. For both of us." Isabel's gaze dropped. She hesitated. "There's something I need to tell you." Elias turned toward her, sensing the change in her voice. "My father, Julian." His face darkened. She swallowed. "He's the one who offered to sponsor Clara. Years ago. I found a letter in Vivian's office." Elias's body stiffened. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you deserve the truth. And because I didn't know, not until recently. But I couldn't stand on that stage tonight and not be honest with you." Elias stood up, breathing hard. "Your father looked me in the eye and said my daughter didn't have to die, that I should have taken his deal like some bargain. I know," she said, rising too. "And I'm not him, Elias. I walked away from all that." Elias paced in a slow circle, fists clenched, then stopped. What was the deal? He wanted to sponsor Clara's musical future. Conservatory tuition. National tour. On one condition, he cut her off. "Let me guess that I walk away. Give her up so he could own her story." Isabel nodded. "I said no. Because I didn't want her growing up thinking music was just currency. That it had to be bought, sold, branded. You chose integrity over opportunity," Isabel said. "I chose her, every damn time." Silence fell between them. "I walked away from my father too. Elias," she said finally. "Tonight, after the performance, he offered me the editor-in-chief role at the Conservatory Voice. Full creative control, international reach, everything I've worked for." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me this because I said no." He blinked. "I told him I'm done writing about other people's music. From now on, I want to create it. Even if it's in small halls, even if it's just one student at a time. I'd rather sit in a room full of kids who believe in sound than in a boardroom full of men who don't believe in anything." Elias stared at her, not with surprise, but with something closer to admiration. "I thought you were polished marble," he said slowly. "Turns out you're clay." and fire. Isabel tilted her head. That's either an insult or the most poetic thing anyone's ever said to me. I'll take the risk. They both laughed. It wasn't loud, but it was real. She looked at him carefully. What now, Elias? Where do we go from here? He took a long breath, and this time. He looked lighter, not fixed, not whole, but no longer broken beyond repair. I've been thinking about Clara's last drawing, the one I kept behind the mop closet, the one with the little music school. He nodded. She titled it The Clara Project. Said she wanted to teach music to kids who couldn't afford lessons. So, they know what joy sounds like even when life gets loud, she wrote. Isabel's eyes welled. She said that she wrote it in crayon. Elias smiled faintly. Misspelled half of it, but the message was perfect. Isabel placed a hand over his heart. Then let's do it. Let's build it. He blinked. You're serious? I walked away from legacy. Now I want to help build one that actually matters. Elias exhaled. Vivian won't let us use the basement, you know. Oh, she will. Trust me, that woman's been orchestrating this whole thing since the first night she saw you play. They both turned toward the playground again. In the distance, a little girl twirled in slow circles beneath the street lamp, humming a tune neither of them recognized, but both of them felt. Elias whispered, I thought I was saving the music. But the music was saving me. Isabel reached for his hand again. You saved each other. They stood in silence, letting the night fold gently around them. Not everything had been said. Not everything had healed. But for the first time, they weren't running. They were staying, choosing, together, 6 months later. The basement of the Westridge Conservatory didn't look like much from the outside, still the same chipped brick walls and dusty windows. But inside it had become something else entirely. Posters of smiling children lined the newly painted walls. Colorful instruments, many donated, some lovingly repaired by Elias himself, filled the old storage shelves. And above the entrance, in bold block letters cut from wood by one of the students' fathers, hung the sign, The Clara Project, where every note finds a home. Elias stood just inside the door, adjusting the bow tie of a young boy who fidgeted in his oversized vest. You ready, Mateo? The boy nodded nervously. Remember what we practiced? Elias asked. Smile, breathe, and pretend they're all just moms and dads. Elias grinned. Exactly. And don't forget what music's for. The boy blinked. What to say? What your heart's been waiting to say. Mateo beamed. Like you said before, music's how we speak without asking permission. Elias's throat tightened. You listened. The small recital hall buzzed with laughter and soft chatter. Parents, social workers, and curious visitors filled every seat. The Clara Project's first official student performance was about to begin, not a polished showcase, but a celebration of second chances. At the back of the room, Isabel adjusted her camera. She'd stepped back from public criticism and into private purpose, documenting the kids' journeys with journalistic grace. Her new column, Notes from the Basement, had gone viral again, not for its bite, but for its heart. Vivian sat in the front row, a silk scarf wrapped around her shoulders, clapping like a proud grandmother for every student that walked on stage. You know, she whispered to Isabel earlier, this place always had good acoustics. It just needed the right kind of echo. As the lights dimmed, Elias stepped up to the microphone. He hadn't prepared a speech. That wasn't his way. But he looked at the children, some tugging at their shirts, some bouncing their knees in excitement, and then at the parents who had never expected their children to find music in a janitor's classroom. He cleared his throat. My daughter once said, Even if you forget the music, I won't. I'll be in every note you play. He paused. I forgot for a while. Not the love, but the sound. Grief does that, turns down the volume on life. But these kids, they've turned it back up. A soft murmur of emotion swept through the room. So tonight isn't about technique. It's not about tempo. It's about heart and hope and honoring every note we almost didn't get to play. The room erupted in warm applause. Elias stepped aside as Matteo took center stage violin, trembling slightly in his small hands. And then he played. The melody was simple, imperfect, and achingly beautiful. Raw like truth, delicate like forgiveness. Backstage, Elias stood beside Isabel, their shoulders touching lightly. "He's playing her lullaby," she whispered. Elias nodded. "I didn't teach him that." He found it himself in the corner of an old sheet Clara scribbled on. Isabel placed a hand on his. "She's here. She never left." They watched in silence, tears quietly lining their eyes. When the last note faded, the room burst into applause. Matteo gave a shy bow, cheeks red, and ran straight into Elias's arms. "You were incredible," Elias whispered. "You made her proud." The boy looked confused. Who a girl who loved this place before you did? Later that evening, after the crowd had thinned and laughter echoed down the hallway, Elias locked the door and turned to Isabel. "You know, I thought I was supposed to leave a legacy through my talent. Through some grand performance the world would never forget." She raised an eyebrow. And now, he looked around the small room, scuffed floor, out-of-tune piano, and dozens of hand-drawn posters by kids who once thought they had no voice. "Turns out the most lasting notes aren't the ones we play for crowds," he said. "They're the ones we leave behind, in other people's hearts." Isabel smiled. "You didn't just build a classroom. You built a chorus of futures." They stood there for a long while. No rush, no fear, just a kind of peace neither had felt in years. Outside, the sky shifted to soft indigo. A few kids lingered by the bench in the park across the street, sharing headphones and humming along to a song they didn't know the name of. One of the girls, no more than 10, turned to Elias as he and Isabel stepped out. "Mr. Ward." He turned. "Yes, I liked that boy's song. I want to sound like him." Elias smiled gently, then glanced at the mural they'd painted together, a portrait of Clara holding a violin, her eyes full of mischief and light. He looked back at the girl and said simply, "You do." The wind picked up, carrying with it a single crumpled sheet of music that fluttered down the sidewalk before coming to rest at Elias's feet. He picked it up, turned it over. In crayon, barely legible beneath smudges of time, were the words, "Keep playing. Dad. Love, Clara." Isabel took his hand, and as they walked into the evening light, not away from the past, but toward something new, the music followed. Not as sound, but as a promise. And maybe that's the truth we all need to remember, that even after the music fades, even after the goodbyes and the heartbreak and the silence, what we leave behind can still echo in someone else's life. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. Let's see how far this story has traveled. And if this story touched your heart, even just a little, let us know. What part moved you the most? What note will stay with you? If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more stories like this. Stories of healing, of hope, of unexpected heroes, and second chances. We're just getting started, and you're a part of this journey now. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening and for remembering. It's not always the loudest voices that change the world. Sometimes it's the quietest ones that leave the most beautiful notes behind.